My name is Nora Whitman. I'm 33 years old, and the last place my brother ever expected to see me was at the head of a glass conference table, with my name etched into the wall behind me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. 3 years ago, I stopped being invited to New Year's dinner. It didn't happen all at once. There was no dramatic argument, no slammed door. Just a message, short, careful, and devastating in the way only family knows how to be. This year is going to be crowded. Mark thinks it'll be better if you sit this one out. Just to keep things smooth. Keep things smooth. That phrase would follow me for years. Mark is my younger brother. 2 years younger, but in my parents' eyes he always felt older. More important, more promising, more worth protecting. He had the louder laugh, the bigger plans, the confidence that came from never being questioned. I stared at my phone that afternoon, standing in my kitchen with a pot of pasta boiling over behind me, and reread the message until the words lost meaning. Sit this one out, as if I were a substitute player, not a daughter. As if New Year's dinner wasn't the one night we were supposed to show up for each other, no matter what. I called my mother immediately. She answered on the second ring, already tense. I could hear the clatter of dishes in the background, the low hum of the television. Preparations were already underway. "Mom," I said, "what does this mean?" She sighed, the way she always did when a conversation wasn't going to go my way. "It's just for this year, Nora. Mark's under a lot of pressure. His job search, his networking dinners, all these important people. He doesn't want any awkwardness." Awkwardness. That was me. When did I become awkward? I asked. There was a pause, long enough to tell me the answer had been discussed without me. "You know how sensitive things can get between you two," she said gently. "We just want a peaceful night." A peaceful night that didn't include me. I could have argued. I could have reminded her that I'd never raised my voice at a family dinner, never caused a scene, never asked for anything more than a seat and a plate. But I already knew how that conversation would end, so I said nothing. That first New Year's Eve, I ate alone. I set my phone face down on the table and pretended not to care when fireworks lit up the sky outside my apartment window. I told myself it was temporary, just one dinner, but one dinner became 2, then 3. The next year, the message came earlier. No explanation this time, just an assumption. We're keeping it small again. Mark's bringing friends. Maybe make other plans. Other plans. As if family were optional. By the 3rd year, I wasn't even surprised. I was erased efficiently, politely, with no room for discussion. No seat set for me. No argument required. What hurt the most wasn't the absence. It was how easy it seemed for everyone else. Mark thrived in the spotlight. At dinners I wasn't invited to, he talked about interviews, connections, future titles. My parents leaned into his stories, nodded along, laughed at the right moments. They spoke about him as if he were already successful, already saved. And me? I became a footnote. She works too much. She's always busy. She doesn't really care about holidays. No one ever asked why. What none of them knew, what they never bothered to ask, was that while I was being quietly removed from family traditions, I was building something from the ground up, something fragile at first, something that required more belief than money. I worked in silence. I learned to stop sharing updates because they were always met with distracted nods or quick subject changes back to Mark. I learned that my effort made people uncomfortable when it didn't fit the story they preferred. So I stopped explaining. By the time the 3rd New Year's Eve rolled around, I had accepted the truth I'd been avoiding. My family had chosen comfort over fairness. They had decided that if one of us had to disappear to keep the night pleasant, it would be me. That night, as my phone buzzed with photos from a table I wasn't welcome at, I sat on my couch and watched the city prepare to celebrate without me. I didn't cry. I didn't text. I didn't beg. I just made a decision. If I no longer had a place at their table, I would stop trying to earn one. 2 days later, my brother would walk into the most important interview of his life, convinced he was finally stepping into his future. He had no idea whose chair he'd be sitting across from. If you asked my parents how things ended up the way they did, they would say it was no one's fault. They'd say it was timing, stress, miscommunication. They'd say Mark was under pressure and I was strong enough to handle being left out. That was the version of the story they were most comfortable with. The truth was messier. The truth was that my brother learned early that if he drew a clear enough line, my parents would stand behind it, even if that line cut straight through me. The first time I noticed, it wasn't even about New Year's. It was months earlier, over something small that somehow revealed everything. Mark had sent me a document late one night, a presentation draft for a role he desperately wanted. The subject line read, "Quick feedback." I opened it while sitting on my living room floor, laptop balanced on a stack of unread mail. Within 5 minutes, my stomach tightened. The structure was clean, too clean, the phrasing familiar in a way that made my skin prickle. I recognized it because I'd seen it before, almost word for word, during my own work. He hadn't copied me directly. He'd copied the source I'd once shown him, assuming I wouldn't notice. When I called him out, he laughed. "You're overthinking it," he said. "Everyone reuses frameworks. You're just better at spotting it." That was Mark's talent, turning ethical lines into optional suggestions, as long as the outcome benefited him. I told him I wasn't comfortable helping unless he rewrote it himself. The silence that followed felt different. He didn't argue. He didn't joke. "You know," he finally said, voice sharp now, "not everyone gets lucky like you. Mom and Dad expect things from me. This job matters." Lucky. That word landed hard. I had spent years convincing myself my effort was invisible because it didn't matter. Hearing him call it luck stripped away the illusion. 2 weeks later, my mother called about New Year's dinner. The timing wasn't a coincidence. By the time I was officially uninvited, the narrative had already been written. I was unsupportive, difficult, too rigid, the sister who couldn't just help out and move on. No one asked me what I'd said or why. They didn't want details. They wanted peace. Peace, in my family, meant siding with whoever made the most noise. By the 3rd year of Exclusion, I stopped pretending it didn't hurt. I stopped making excuses for them. I let myself acknowledge the quiet grief of realizing that love in my family was conditional. That same year, something else happened. I was added to a private family group chat by accident. I didn't notice at first. The notifications were muted, buried under work messages and calendar alerts. It wasn't until one slow afternoon that I scrolled through and saw my mother's name attached to a photo. It was Mark, dressed sharply, confident, surrounded by smiling relatives I hadn't seen in years. The caption read, "So proud of this one. Once he lands that position, everything will finally fall into place." A comment followed from an aunt. "And Nora?" My mother replied before anyone else could. She chose her career. Mark chose family. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. There it was, the official explanation for my absence. The reason they could tell themselves they were right. I hadn't been pushed out. I'd opted out. I took a screenshot and closed the app without responding. That night, another message appeared. A video this time. Grainy. Loud. Everyone crowded around the table, glasses raised. My father's voice cut through the noise. "As long as nothing gets in Mark's way this year, we'll be just fine." Laughter followed. Someone joked about interviews. Someone mentioned the company name Mark was obsessed with. The one he'd been talking about for months. The one he was convinced would change everything. I felt something inside me settle. Not anger. Not even sadness. Clarity. They weren't worried about me. They were worried I might interfere. That my presence alone was a risk they didn't want to manage. What made it almost surreal was that the company they were pinning all their hopes on, the one they believed would rescue Mark, restore balance, fix their anxiety, was already a central part of my life. They just didn't know it. I hadn't hidden it out of spite. I hadn't announced it because every time I tried to share something meaningful, The room shifted uncomfortably, as if I'd broken an unspoken rule. I learned early that my success made people defensive, so I let them underestimate me. By the time the video ended, I had replayed it 3 times, not to punish myself, but to understand something important. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a pattern. They had built a version of me that made their choices easier, a version where excluding me was reasonable, necessary even. And once I saw that clearly, something in me changed. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want apologies that would evaporate by the next holiday. I wanted to stop being written out of my own story. 2 mornings later, as I stood in the elevator of my office building, watching the numbers climb, I felt a strange calm settle over me. My reflection stared back, composed, steady, older somehow. Down the hall, a conference room was being prepared for a candidate interview. My brother was on the schedule. He thought he was finally being invited to the right table. He had no idea who owned it. The company didn't start in a boardroom. It started in a windowless office above a closed-down bakery, where the floor slanted just enough to make your chair slowly drift if you didn't lock the wheels. There were 4 of us then. Too many ideas, not enough money, and a shared belief that if we just kept going, something would eventually break in our favor. That space smelled like burnt coffee and old paper. I loved it anyway. I worked longer hours than I ever admitted to anyone, not because I was chasing some title, but because the work felt honest, clear. If something failed, it was on us. If it worked, it was because we earned it. While my parents were hosting dinners I wasn't welcome at, I was sleeping on a couch in that office more nights than I can count. I learned how to negotiate contracts at midnight and how to sound confident on 3 hours of sleep. I learned that silence, when chosen, can be powerful. There were moments I wanted to tell them. To call my mother and say, I'm building something real. To tell my father that the spreadsheets I stared at for hours were not distractions, but foundations. But every time I imagined the conversation, I saw their polite smiles, the quick nod before the topic shifted back to Mark's progress, his pressure, his potential. So I stopped rehearsing those conversations. The company grew, slowly at first, painfully. We pitched to people who didn't take us seriously and heard no so often that it lost its sting. We adjusted, learned, refined. One investor finally said yes, then another. Small wins stacked on top of each other until they started to look like momentum. By the 2nd year, we had real clients, real revenue, a small team that trusted me not because I was loud, but because I listened. When my co-founder decided to step back for personal reasons, I bought out his share quietly. No announcement, no celebration, just a signed agreement and the weight of full responsibility settling on my shoulders. A few months later, the board voted unanimously. I became CEO. No confetti, no speech, just work. I didn't tell my family, not because I was afraid of their reaction, but because I already knew what it would be. They would be proud, maybe, briefly, and then the questions would start. What does this mean for Mark? Can you help him? Could he talk to someone there? I wasn't ready to have my work reframed as a resource to be distributed. So I let them believe what they wanted, that I was doing fine, that I was busy, that my life was separate from theirs. Meanwhile, Mark talked endlessly about the company. He didn't know it was mine. He just knew it was prestigious, competitive, selective, the kind of place that impressed people when you dropped the name at dinner. He practiced interview answers out loud at my parents' kitchen table, according to my mother. He researched leadership styles, rehearsed case studies, polished his confidence until it shone. He never once asked me what I thought. The morning of his interview, I arrived early. The building felt different that day, charged, as if the air itself knew something important was about to happen. I stood in my office for a moment, staring at my name on the door, not out of pride, but disbelief. 3 years earlier, I'd been uninvited from a family dinner for being inconvenient. Now my signature determined careers. Maya, our operations director, knocked lightly before stepping in. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. "I just want the process to be clean." She understood immediately. That was the culture we'd built. Fairness wasn't a slogan. It was the point. The interview panel assembled. Resumes laid out. Water glasses filled. Everything professional. Neutral. When Mark walked in, he didn't see me right away. He scanned the room with the ease of someone who assumed he belonged there. He smiled, shook hands, made eye contact. When his gaze finally landed on me, it flickered. Recognition without understanding. He looked surprised, but not concerned. To him, I was just his older sister, the one who worked too much, the one who got intense about details. He had no reason to think otherwise. The HR director cleared her throat. "Before we begin," she said, turning slightly toward me, "I'd like to make introductions." Mark straightened, confidence fully in place. "This," she continued, "is our CEO." The silence that followed felt enormous. Mark turned slowly, really looked at me this time. His smile faltered, then collapsed entirely. For a split second, I saw it on his face, the recalculation, the sudden, unwelcome understanding that the power dynamic he'd relied on his entire life had shifted. He opened his mouth, then closed it. We held each other's gaze across the table. No anger, no triumph, just the truth, finally visible. The interview continued. Professionally, calmly. Mark answered questions. Some well, some not. The confidence he'd walked in with didn't disappear, but cracked. He stumbled over explanations, leaned too heavily on buzzwords, avoided specifics. When it was my turn to speak, I asked one question. "Can you tell us about a time you had to choose between keeping things comfortable and doing what was right?" He hesitated. In that pause lived every New Year's dinner I'd eaten alone. The interview ended without drama. Mark left the room, quieter than he'd entered. And for the first time, I wasn't sure what would come next. The door closed behind Mark with a soft click. No one spoke for a moment, not because anything dramatic had happened, but because everyone in the room felt the shift. The kind you don't hear, only sense, like pressure changing before a storm. The HR director glanced at me, subtle but checking in. I gave a small nod. "Let's finish," I said evenly. And we did. We reviewed notes, compared impressions, stripped the interview down to facts instead of feelings. The conclusion was clear long before we reached it. Mark wasn't unqualified, but he wasn't ready. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed while I was back in my office, staring at a spreadsheet I couldn't focus on. "Mark, can we talk?" "Please." I didn't respond immediately. That was new for me. In the past, I would have rushed to manage his discomfort, to smooth things over before anyone else felt uneasy. But I was tired of being the soft place everyone landed while I absorbed the impact. I replied 15 minutes later. "Me, you can come by. I'm home." He arrived fast, tie loosened, hair disheveled. The confidence he wore so easily had slipped off somewhere between the elevator and my front door. "You knew," he said the moment I let him in. "You knew the whole time." I closed the door gently behind him. "I knew what company you were applying to." "Yes." "You didn't say anything." His voice cracked between accusation and disbelief. All those dinners, all those conversations about how this job would change everything. I leaned against the kitchen counter. "You mean the dinners I wasn't invited to?" He flinched. "That's not fair," he muttered. "We were just trying to keep things calm." There it was again. Calm. Peace. Comfort. The language of erasure. "You told them it was you or me," I said quietly. "And they chose you. Every time." He paced the room, hands running through his hair. "I didn't think it would turn into all this." "That's the problem," I replied. "You didn't think." He stopped, looked at me properly this time. "So what happens now?" he asked. "Are you going to tank my chances?" The question landed heavier than he intended. It wasn't about the job. It was about who he thought I was. "No," I said. I'm not sabotaging you. Relief flashed across his face, quickly replaced by something else. Then why did you sit in on the interview? Because I'm the CEO, I said simply, and because I won't pretend not to exist anymore. He sank onto the couch. I thought you were just fine, he admitted. Mom always said you didn't need anyone, that you were strong. I swallowed. They decided that, I said, without asking. Silence stretched between us. Not hostile, just overdue. Finally, he spoke again. Did I mess it up? I considered him carefully. Not the brother I grew up protecting. Not the golden child everyone revolved around. Just a man facing consequences for the first time. You weren't ready for the role you applied for, I said. That's the truth. His shoulders slumped. So that's it. Not exactly. He looked up. There's a junior position opening, I continued. Different team. Different manager. No special treatment. If you want to learn, actually learn, you can apply. That feels like punishment, he said quietly. It's not, I replied. It's reality. He nodded slowly, as if something in him finally understood. A week later, my mother called. Her voice was tight, controlled. How could you embarrass your brother like that? I didn't embarrass him, I said. I treated him like every other candidate. He needed that job, she insisted. We were counting on it. There it was. The truth she'd never said out loud. I've been helping for years, I said calmly. You just didn't know. She went quiet. We didn't think you needed help, she said eventually. That was your mistake, I replied. The next New Year's invitation came with apologies wrapped in hope. A clean slate, a chance to be together again. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed back, I'm open to rebuilding, but not at a table where I had to disappear to keep the peace. That night, I hosted my own dinner. Friends, colleagues, people who saw me fully. At midnight, as glasses clinked and laughter filled my apartment, my phone buzzed. A photo from Mark. An empty chair at my parents' table. No caption. I smiled, not because anyone had lost, but because, for the first time, I had chosen myself. 6 months passed. Life didn't explode or collapse the way people imagine it does after a confrontation. It simply adjusted, like a room after furniture has been moved. Strange at first, then easier to breathe in. At work, the company expanded faster than I'd expected. New clients, new partnerships, the kind of growth that demanded presence, not just leadership from behind a screen. I spent my days in meetings and my nights reviewing decisions that affected hundreds of people I'd never meet personally. Responsibility has a way of sharpening your priorities. Mark took the junior role. I didn't hear about it directly from him. Maya mentioned it casually one afternoon, as if it were just another onboarding note. He accepted, she said. Didn't argue. That surprised me. Over the next few weeks, she shared small observations. He showed up early, asked questions instead of talking over people, stayed late without being asked. No grand gestures, just work. He's struggling, she admitted once, but he's not blaming anyone. That mattered more than any apology. At home, my parents struggled differently. The first few weeks after the interview were tense. My mother called often, circling the same conversation without ever landing on it. She wanted reassurance without responsibility, closure without accountability. One evening, she finally said it. You didn't have to be so firm. I did, I replied. She sighed. Families bend for each other. Families don't erase each other, I said. That ended the call. I didn't block them. I didn't announce boundaries in dramatic declarations. I simply stopped performing emotional labor for people who wouldn't meet me halfway. For the first time, I let the silence do its work. New Year's came again, quietly this time. No group texts, no carefully worded invitations, just a brief message from my father. If you want to come, you're welcome. No conditions, no warnings. I read it twice. Then I put my phone down. That night, I cooked for myself. Nothing fancy. A simple meal eaten slowly, deliberately. I watched the clock tick toward midnight and felt calm. At 12, fireworks lit up the skyline outside my window. I stood there alone, glass in hand, and realized something unexpected. I didn't miss them the way I thought I would. A week later, Mark showed up at my door again. He looked different. Tired, yes, but grounded, like someone learning the weight of his own choices. I told him everything, he said without preamble. About the dinners, the ultimatum, the assignment, all of it. I studied his face, searching for defensiveness. There was none. They didn't take it well, he continued, but they listened. For once. I nodded. That was between you and them. I know, he said quickly. I just wanted you to know I'm not letting them rewrite it anymore. We sat in silence for a while, not uncomfortable, just honest. I used to think being chosen meant being loved, he said eventually. Now I think it just meant being convenient. I smiled faintly. Welcome to the realization. Before he left, he hesitated. Maybe next year, he said carefully, we do something different. Just us. No pressure. Maybe, I replied. After he left, I stood in my living room and looked around. The life I'd built felt solid, intentional, mine. I thought about the woman I'd been 3 years earlier, staring at her phone, trying to understand how she'd been quietly removed from her own family. I wished I could tell her this. You're not too much. You're not the problem. And the table you're chasing isn't the one you're meant to sit at. Sometimes the absence you're afraid of becomes the space you need to grow. The following year arrived quietly. No dramatic phone calls, no last-minute messages. I woke up to Chicago's soft winter light and felt something different, light but steady. The weight of expectation no longer pressed on my shoulders. I poured myself a cup of coffee, looking out at the city skyline. The lights reflected in the icy streets reminded me of the confetti animations from our company dashboard, and I realized just how far I'd come. Bridgepoint Capital wasn't just a name on a wall. It was a universe I had built with my own hands. Investors trusted me, my team trusted me, and small businesses across the country were thriving because of the platform I had painstakingly crafted. My parents' version of me, the quiet girl who bent to the comfort of others, had long been replaced by someone who could command a boardroom, a conference call, and her own destiny. That New Year's, I didn't receive a group text. I didn't wait by the phone. I set my table with friends, colleagues, and a few of the small business owners whose dreams we'd funded. The apartment was warm. Laughter bounced off the walls, and I felt a calm satisfaction unlike anything I'd experienced when my parents' approval had been the only goal. Midnight came. We toasted under the glow of fairy lights and the twinkle of Chicago's skyline below. Somewhere across the city, my parents and Mark were celebrating at their dinner, unaware that the empty chair at the end of their table had a story of silent justice behind it. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need the satisfaction of watching them stumble or realize the magnitude of what they had dismissed. The victory was quiet, steady, and entirely my own. I received a text from Mark a few minutes later, a photo of their table with the final chair unoccupied. No caption, no words, just an empty seat. I understood immediately. Recognition, respect, and perhaps the faintest hint of regret. It wasn't for me to savor. It was a reminder of what I had already built, a world in which I was fully present, fully visible, and no longer negotiating my existence for anyone's comfort. Months passed. Mark took the junior role I had offered. He learned what it meant to earn respect rather than assume it. He worked under a manager who was fair but firm, navigating spreadsheets and decisions with a humility he had never known in our parents' home. He didn't quit. He didn't throw tantrums. He simply began to grow. And I expanded Bridgepoint. Series C funding had been announced. Our team doubled. Offices opened in new cities. Articles highlighted my leadership and the innovative ways we were shaping everyday investing. I was recognized publicly, but no one at home knew the depth of my struggle, The years spent building in silence, or the nights I had spent wondering if my family would ever truly see me. Then came another message from my mother, soft and hesitant this time. "Would you like to come next year?" I stared at it. The familiar tug of expectation rose briefly, then subsided. I typed back, "I'm open to rebuilding, but not at a table where I had to disappear to keep the peace. If you want a relationship with me, it has to happen in the light." I sent it before I could soften it. That night, I celebrated with my chosen family again. Friends, colleagues, and the people who mattered, the ones who saw me fully. We laughed, clinked glasses, and welcomed the new year together. The glow of the city outside mirrored the glow I felt inside. I had a table where I belonged, a table that I had built with my own hands. And the knowledge that I would never have to shrink myself to fit anyone else's comfort was sweeter than any toast, any champagne, or any hollow applause. Because here's the truth nobody tells you about family betrayal, about being erased, about years of quiet dismissal. The real power isn't in revenge. The real power isn't in making them pay. It's in standing solid, claiming your seat, building your life, and letting them live with the echoes of the choices they made. That is the victory that lasts. That is the celebration worth raising a glass for. And as the city lights flickered beneath us, I knew this was exactly where I was meant to be.